Arise of Awakener, the awkwardly named spiritual successor to Dragons Dogma, recently announced at the Tokyo Game Show. We were interested by this one on the channel. You know, there's not many true Monster Hunter-like games out there, and one of the few in that number suggested to me while I was doing my Monster Hunter-like series was, of course, Dragons Dogma. It's a world of fantasy and magic, sure, but it's filled to the brim with a wide variety of big, scary monsters to go fight and hunt. From dragons to ogres, chimera, and more, you're fighting in groups or even climbing up onto these monsters for whatever advantage you can get. A well-respected and loved RPG, one that was pretty damn groundbreaking for its time. Sadly though, we still don't know if we're even getting Dragons Dogma 2. It is largely anticipated though. But in that time comes along Arise of Awakener, directly inspired by Dragons Dogma and built as a spiritual successor for next gen. An action RPG from Gamera Game, described officially as a single-player, open-map action role-playing game set in a fantasy world based on medieval Europe. In this world, players will ride dragons, command airships, partake in engaging combat encounters against, of course, fantasy creatures, all while following a story based on revenge and, of course, redemption, just like Dragons Dogma in its concept, but with a few new additions. And while that's all a very promising idea, when I talked about Arise briefly as part of a Monster Hunter-like games you might not know about video, people had some mixed thoughts on this one, because it looked really promising, but maybe a little bit too good to be true. After all, visually the trailer was impressive in what it was promising to do. The scale itself for the game is big, that's an immense world promised. But was this, actual gameplay? One comment I distinctly remember on that video was how the dragons shown appear to be bought assets, which could be a red flag unless this is an indie dev team, which it might be. So what is Arise of Awakener actually? Who are the people behind it? What does it promise? And will it even ever release? Let's talk about it. Let's start with the details of the game. What is actually promising about this game? What's it trying to be? Now, as I said, it's a Dragons Dogma spiritual successor, so we can expect a lot of the same main beats. An action RPG in a huge open world from, of course, a third-person perspective. As part of the core of that game, we had a choice between vocations to, say, be a fighter, a mage, or a ranger. But as you progressed in Dragons Dogma, you'd earn more points to spend and further your unique build, eventually becoming, say, an assassin or a mystic knight. Arise of Awakener promises basically the same thing in its description. You start with a choice of warrior, archer, and mage, but we can assume you progress into more unique depths of that. As we watch the trailer and various combat moments, you can clearly see there's an assassin fighting, which is not what an archer is, of course. So those might be the starting points for your builds and playstyles, but they will evolve. In Dragons Dogma, the class system would completely change how you actually approach the world and, of course, the combat. An archer might be aiming and shooting arrows at the ogre, even aiming for the eye for a critical hit, while the strider was made for combat climbing of that game, where you could jump on and straddle enemy and work around almost Shadow of Colossus style and maybe make your way to a weak point like, hey, the ogre eye, and stab that directly. The trailer of Arise though shows us plenty of different combat situations, which often splice in some pretty incredible looking magic moments, which was not so fleshed out system in DD. It's looking fast paced, a hack and slash style combat system against a whole selection of enemies actually. There's huge unit enemies, there's dragons or little orc types, there's humans, skeletons to fight, even big Diablo-esque demons to contend with at certain moments. So in just this announced trailer, we actually saw a lot of the combat and what we'll be facing, and it all looked pretty cool. The speed at which you're fighting and comboing out attacks seems really engaging, especially with the way you're splicing in magic, even as someone who isn't maybe a full-on mage. The knight had these flashes of red during certain attacks like a charge or the leaping strikes. The assassin was enhancing their attacks by lighting their weapon on fire. And of course, there's channeled or quick-fired spells from the various mage-specific clips to consider as well. And finally, we also saw glimpses of the classic Strider-style climbing from Dragons Dogma, if it couldn't get any more on the nose what this game is trying to be. Dragons Dogma was well ahead of its time, and to see someone at least try to recreate that feeling, but now in Unreal Engine 5, it's very exciting. The speed and flow of that combat appears to be smoother than DD, which sure, yeah, it's aged a bit as time has passed. But overall, I think the combat looks good, and hopefully it'll be challenging as well. The variety of enemies and the amount of them, whether it's a horde of skeletons or just a 1v1 against some big monster, it all looks good. Now for other game mechanics, Thankfully, for me, we didn't see anything like the pawns of Dragons Dogma. That might upset you to hear. You may have even loved the pawn system in that game. Personally, I found it a bit invasive and a bit clunky. In my games, I never really picked the pet class or like a summoner, because it's just not my thing to micromanage other characters. In DD, you basically had to create your own special party. So say you're a warrior or whatever, it would be easier to play that if you also had a healing mage on your team and an archer, maybe an assassin, basically covering where you're not strong as a class. And that's what the pawn system did. You got to completely create your own pawn characters. How they look, how they function, what they're going to do, their stats, their attitude, even how they sound. Conceptually, it was a really neat system, but it wasn't something I personally liked. Maybe it's because I played the game really late. I only played it recently, and it's been like 10 years since its release now. Either way, we haven't seen anything like the pawn system in the trailer, so I'm relieved, but you might not be. On the other hand, something not in DD that could have been incredible was the whole air-based stuff we're seeing in Arise. We're told we can ride the dragons and have our own airships, which is shown in the trailer briefly. Apparently we command these dragons, obviously using them for travel, but I'm wondering, will they have any extra uses, like on-ground combat like an ally? Or perhaps there's going to be aerial combat where we're fighting dragon to dragon up in the sky. On the other hand, there's also the airships, which we command. We do see a tiny moment on an airship in the trailer, but it certainly doesn't tell us what we're going to be doing with them. Generally in the world though, there's going to be towns and cities to explore. We saw a bit of that with like the inns and the bustling streets. Out in the world, we'll find chests and resources to gather, maybe for profession purposes. But essentially it seems like generic, expected aspects of a big, open, medieval world to explore with your questing and progressing the main story. That main story is all about becoming the quote, awakened one. Sounds a lot like an Arisen, doesn't it? They tell us that the quest to become an awakened one is one of impossible odds, a great challenge to overcome. But what is an awakened one and why are we doing that? We don't know. As of now, they've kept the details beyond the trailer and the little extra descriptions pretty close to the chest, so we're gonna have to wait to learn a bit more. So that's what the game is meant to be, and the trailer gives us a good showing of different aspects of that, but will it actually happen? Is this even real? You know, so many projects have been announced and then abandoned. It's not like I can say for sure, but I can tell you these details. It has an official release window of sometime 2023 right now, and is set to release on PC, PlayStation 4 and 5. It's being developed by a Chinese studio called Tanner Games, and published and announced by Gamera Game. Gamera Game actually have made some big efforts to release lots of Chinese indie games on Steam, so they actually have a pretty good track record so far. When we look at the official website for Tanner Games though, there's some sparse information here. Established only recently in 2020, this team is located in Shanghai, China, and it's a team that's focused on game development, and the core members apparently have many years of experience in that. They claim that they've participated in the production of well-known IPs at home and abroad, but they don't list what those are. They want to reach the AAA level standard, which sounds like they're an indie team to me, and based on what we know about Gamera Games, that would make sense. And that's all nice to hear, but without stating, you know, what they've worked on or who they really are, it's kind of all on faith right now. Ultimately, I think it's a good concept for a game, with some impressive looking gameplay and a seemingly huge world to explore. If they can bring the feeling of Dragons Dogma into current gen, even in any form like this, I think it's a good thing. Interest for this game was high. The response was good. The official trailer on IGN has just under 1 million views and some really encouraging top comments. If anything, I think this shows that people would love to see a Dragons Dogma style game. Or hey, maybe even Dragons Dogma 2? Maybe? Let me know what you think though. Is this too good to be true? Or are you excited for even just a spiritual successor, if not an actual DD2? For now though, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.